We're now being recorded. And let's
Got
get
it.
the sheet up.
Oh, there's Gwen. Where?
Okay, can everyone see that? Do I need to zoom in on it more?
A little bit.
Yes, a little.
A little.
Okay.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
All right, so we are in Parshat Tazria Metzora this week. Most will say that this is one of the more challenging, more obscure parshiot that we have. Deals primarily with laws of tzara'at, which we translate as leprosy. Huge debate as to what tzara'at is and whether tzara'at is some sort of physical medical condition or whether it's some sort of spiritual condition or both. We're not going to get into that debate tonight, but it's a really interesting and has a lot of ramifications for what we will be speaking about. Other highlights in the parsha, it shouldn't say it's obscure. It does certainly have the laws of taharat mishpacha, family purity. Right, this is, according to many, the source of the mitzvah for brit milah, for circumcision. As the very beginning of the parsha, there's some interesting things about all sorts of halachot around childbirth and the first days of the baby's life. But we're going to focus on what seems to be one of the most obscure of all the details in this double parsha, and that is nig'ei habayit, tzara'at, or leprosy, or however we're going to translate it, of the home. And so just before we get into any of the details of what the Torah tells us, the structure is quite interesting because most of the Torah's descriptions of tzara'at, who knows where tzara'at can afflict a person?
Oh, well, it's generally on the body, but not
Okay,
on
so we're most
it.
familiar, I think, with tzara'at of the skin, of the flesh. That's where the term leprosy comes from. Where else?
Can't it also affect the clothes? Your house?
Okay, so I heard two people talking at one time. Hannah, you said what,
I
clothing?
was going to say it's also on the clothing.
Could be on
It's on the
clothing.
skin, on the clothing, and in the house
Right.
and on the walls.
And Cheryl, what did you say?
I said on your house.
On your
Yeah.
house. Okay, so the house, that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight. The first two appear about a chapter and a half earlier in the Torah than the description of tzara'at of the house. So structurally, like that in itself is a little bit odd that they don't all appear together, but there's a break between description of tzara'at on the person, tzara'at on the clothing, those come together in the Torah, and then we have to skip forward about a chapter and a half in order to get to the description of tzara'at of the house. So that in itself is something to keep in mind as we work our way through this. I'm not going to read all these verses inside, but let's just get a feel for it. If I need to scroll down in the English, someone will please let me know. Right, Aber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aharon limor. God speaks to Moses and to Aaron. Ki tavo el eretz Canaan asher ani noten lachem le'achuzah. V'natati negat tzara'at bebeit eretz achuzatchem. When you come to the land of Canaan, which I will give to you as an inheritance, I will give, or I will place, an affliction of tzara'at on the home which you possess. Uba asher lo habayit v'higid lakohen lemor kinega nir eli babayit. So this is really interesting. The one whose home is who owns the home should come to the kohen and say, "It appears to me that I have a negat, that I have a tzara'at, that I have this this tzara'at affliction on my home," or infection, or however we want to translate it. Right, so very interesting that the Gemara is very precise here. The fact that the person comes and says kinega, it appears that I have a nega. The Gemara says even if the person is a Torah sage who knows for certain what tzara'at looks like. Nonetheless, they have to come to the priest and say, it appears that I have an affliction of leprosy. The reason for that is until the priest declares it tzara'at, it's not tzara'at, right? If it's leprosy, if it's some sort of medical condition, so you don't need, you want the doctor to get a diagnosis correct, but you have that disease, whether the doctor tells you you have it or you don't have it, right? We've all heard stories of people that it takes a very long time to get a proper diagnosis from a physician, from a doctor. But you still have the symptoms, even if you don't have a name for what it is. But here, if you don't have the name, if you don't have the official designation by the Kohen, then it's not considered tzara'at. And that's quite advantageous because the Torah tells us that before the Kohen comes to inspect, they empty out the house. Because if the Kohen were to declare it to be tzara'at, then everything in the house would be tameh, would be impure, and would have to be destroyed, or would have to go through some sort of extensive process of purification. So we clear the house out, right? This is one of the prime examples of the principle in the Talmud, Chasa Torah al Mamonam Shel Yisrael, that the Torah is compassionate, is sympathetic to the Jewish people's money, to their finances. And so we don't make the person go through the entire possibility of having their home declared tzara'at until they were able to clear it out and save the possessions that might have otherwise been affected. The Torah continues, it tells us that the Kohen comes, if he's uncertain, he does not immediately declare it to be tzara'at, but he gives a period of quarantine or of waiting to see if it spreads or if it perhaps clears on its own. And after that, they first try to remove just the area that seems to have this that seems to be affected by it. If it persists or it spreads to the rest of the house, so then they have to tear the house apart and go through this entire ritual process. But quite right. So and in fact, many say that the way that the question is originally posed to the Kohen should serve as kind of a paradigm for any time a person has a halachic question, that they shouldn't ask the question in a way that assumes the answer already, but you should ask it in a way that kind of leaves it open that maybe it's not what I think it is. Kinega. It appears like tzara'at, but maybe it's not really that. Okay. So we already said that are there any general questions about this first section? Any about the Torah's description of the leprosy tzara'at of the house?
I think some people sort of jump to from the pandemic rather than really thinking it out. Say I have COVID. Yeah. But they're not sure, and they don't.
Well, for a while it was a pretty safe bet, but yes, that's true. But also, right, this parsha became extremely relevant during COVID because for a person that's afflicted with tzara'at, so there is a possibility of quarantine. Right? There is a possibility of being sent out of the camp and being forced to be alone, but a quarantine, just like many of us were going through at various points for the past 3 years. So this parsha became very relevant in ways that we never would have imagined it would have. We already mentioned that this appearance of the passage of tzara'at of the house is separate from the appearance of tzara'at, the other forms of tzara'at. I'm going to come back to the way that those are formulated. But before we get there, I want to skip down to source number 3, which is a midrash from Vayikra Rabbah. And the midrash begins by quoting a pasuk from Job, from Eov, that one's household will be cast forth by a flood spilled out on the day of God's wrath. So the Medrash says, when will this happen? Ematai, biyom sheyigreh HaKadosh Baruch Hu apo be'oto ha'ish. On the day when God shows his wrath against that person, ha-ketzad, and when is that, or how does God show God's wrath against such a person? Adam omer lechavero hashileni kav chitim v'amar lo ein li kav ein li. Person says, can I borrow some flour? Can I borrow some wheat? And they say, I don't have any, I'm sorry. Amar kav seorim, can I borrow some barley? You don't have wheat flour? Give me maybe some barley flour. Ainli. Kav tmarim, what about some dates? Ainli. Isha omer lechaverta heshileni nafa, he omeret ainli. Or a woman asks her friend, can I borrow a strainer or some other kitchen utensil? And she says, I don't have. Hashileni kivara amar ve'omeret ainli. Or can I borrow a sieve, a strainer? Right? People ask their neighbors to borrow things, and they say, I don't have. So what does God do to a person who tells their neighbor, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to lend you? God afflicts that person's home with nigaim, with sarat. So before the Kohen comes to diagnose and to see if this is in fact sarat, the person has to empty out their house. And when they do that, everyone's going to see all the things that they were hiding. You told me you don't have any flour. You told me you don't have any a food processor, or a strainer, cup, whatever to lend. You just pulled it all out. What happened? Ru'u kama chitim yeshkan, kama sorim, right? Look, you have all the stuff that we asked you for that you said you don't have. Lavat beita be'elin lavatia. So then it says, curse a cursed house with these curses. Rabbi Yitzchak or Rabbi Eliezer. Ma'itela meha min hade kra shakaku wrote shaka beita be'ilan lavatia. Okay, so the Torah says that the house, the sign of tzarat of the house is it goes deep into the wood, into the walls of the house. So again, right, so the depth of the affliction should be a curse to the house. Lefichach Moshe masir et Yisrael ki tavo el eretz Canaan. So that's why Moshe warns the Jewish people when you come to the land of Canaan. Okay, so we have the beginning of a rationale for why someone's house might be afflicted with sarat. According to this medrash, why would someone get sarat?
For being stingy and selfish?
For being stingy and selfish.
Mhm.
Good. Not that we should be that way, but that's what the medrash is telling us. Rabbanit Sharon Rimon from Israel makes an interesting observation, and this will become even more relevant in a couple more minutes. But she notes that being stingy, being miserly, is not a sin. A person has the right to do as he pleases with his own property. There's no obligation to lend to others.
But lying to
Nice thing
somebody
to do, there's a mitzvah of tzedakah, but there's rules about how much tzedakah you have to give, and you don't have to give all the time. Right, this person wasn't obligated to lend out the flour or the strainer or whatever else. There's no obligation to lend to others, but miserliness is a negative trait that must be corrected. From this point of view, and keep this in mind because we're going to come back to it, sarat of the house is not really a punishment, but rather a catalyst for change, causing the person to mend his ways.
But the
experience of tzarat upon his house, he comes to understand that it is not proper that he hoard his property to himself. He must also share with others.
The miser may have been proper. The miser may have been okay in being stingy or miserly, but not to lie.
Right.
Mm.
Right. So that's
Lying
a
is
good
something
point,
else.
right? Even you could have said, yes, I have it, but I don't want to lend it to you.
That's right.
I'm sorry, I'm cooking for my grandkids. I need my flour. But to lie certainly is a problem. So that's good. That's a good observation, Arthur. That it's right? Even if you don't have to lend it, you shouldn't lie about it. But she says the point of tzarat of the house isn't necessarily as a punishment, but it's a sign that a person has to change their ways. If in fact the tzarat is coming because you didn't lend out and you weren't a good neighbor, so this is a Torah's way of telling us that we have to change our ways. Gemara in Sanhedrin says something fascinating about all this, and this might sound familiar from the context of some other mitzvot that are familiar to us. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, "Kiman azla ha detanya," right? So they want to know whose opinion does the following statement follow, and the statement is this: Bait haminuga lo haya velo atid lihiot. A house afflicted with tzarat never was and never will be. Vilama nichtav. Why is it written in the Torah? Drosh v'kabel schar. So that we can learn about it and receive a reward for studying it. Does this sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Where
Yeah.
else have we heard such a formulation?
The Ben Sorera Moreh, the rebellious
Yes,
son.
Ben Sora Umora, the rebellious child. Also, right, so there it's fascinating because this comes from the same page of Gemara. And the Gemara there says, right, that one rabbi says, Ben Sora Lohaya Veloati Liot, there never was and never will be. We also see by Ir Hanidachat, a city that goes completely to idolatry. But when in the Torah, in the Talmud's discussion of the Ben Sora Moreh, so then another rabbi says, what are you talking about? I saw such a child and I sat at his grave. It did happen, and it happened in a very real way. So it's an interesting debate when the Talmud tells us this, but nonetheless, we're told that also concerning a house afflicted with tzarat, that this is a theoretical. This is not something that was ever actualized. So that begs the question even more: what lesson are we supposed to learn from it? If the lesson is be a nice person, we have other instances in the Torah that teach us that. Right? So why if that's the case, why? The Sforno has a really interesting take on this, and we'll just read the English because it was a very lengthy Sforno, and so the English does a good job of getting to the key points. Once man becomes aware of God's concern for him, he will have little difficulty in making his own will correspond to the revealed will of his maker. He will begin to realize that by listening to the urgings of his bodily dominated desires, he risks losing his eternal life and the death of his body. He would also signal the death of his life force, nefesh, just as that of all the animals. Even though we see many people defy God in their lifestyles, we can be sure in the words of God in Exodus, Kilo atzdik rasha, I will not allow the wicked to appear as if he were a just person. Okay, the author, in continuing this sermon, describes all the Gentiles and most of the Jews of his time as so oblivious to all this that they may be compared to as existing in a permanent state of spiritual coma. Nonetheless, if God chose the Jewish people as his special people, it is because he entertains the fond hope that out of this nation there will emerge a nucleus of people who are aware of their destiny. When the Jewish people are predominantly in the state of spiritual coma, the author just described, the symptoms described in our portion will not appear, as it would be a waste of time to hope that the people thus afflicted would see in these symptoms a message from their God. In other words, it never was actualized because we never got to a high enough spiritual state to appreciate the lesson. Which is a really interesting take on it. Whether that's pshat, I don't know, but it certainly is a beautiful message of the Sforno to teach us that, yes, we have these halachot in place, but sometimes we're not in a state ready to receive or to experience all the rules, all the laws of the Torah that are being set up or set out, and we have to work on ourselves in order to get to such a state. which is quite interesting.
That's similar to the idea I've seen in the Rebbe and elsewhere that the only occasions of Sarat were of the houses of the Canaanites who had put gold in the walls.
You're skipping ahead, Anne. You're skipping ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
That's okay.
okay.
That's okay. We're gonna get
All
there
right,
in a
I'll
second.
wait.
Next source.
Sorry.
Good transition.
Okay.
Source number 7, Vayikra Rabbah. Uchtiv. It says, "Benatati negat tzarat." I will place an affliction of tzarat. Tani Rabbi Chia. V'chi besora hi lahem shenagaim ba'im alehem. Why it makes this assumption, it's not clear, but he assumes that in the Torah's formulation of "I will give an affliction of tzarat," that this is somehow a tiding of good news. Bisora. And somehow this is a tiding of good news. So it says, how could it be good news that a person's going to be afflicted with tzarat? Tani Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Kevan sheshamu Kananim sheYisraelim ba'im alehem, amdu v'itzminu mamonam bebatim uvasadot. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, when the nations that lived in Canaan prior to Joshua's conquest heard that the Jewish people were coming, they hid their money, their riches, in their homes and in their fields. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani hiftachtani la'avotehem shani machnisa b'neihem la'eretz mleya kol tuv. God says, I promised the avot, I promised the forefathers that I will bring their descendants to a land full of good. Shene'emar vatim mleim kol tuv. It says when God describes bringing the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael, that the homes will be filled with all good. Ma HaKadosh Baruch Hu oseh. So what does God do? So God afflicts the person's home with tzarat, and the person has to take the house apart and finds these riches. How do the Canaanite nations know that the Jewish people were going to come and enter the land? Amar Rabbi Yishmael bar Nachman shalosh puz dagmaot shalach Yeshua etzlam harotze lifanot yifaneh lahashlim yashlim lasot milchama yaaseh. Says that Yehoshua sent 3 messengers or 3 messages to the inhabitants of the land. He said, whoever wants to leave should leave, whoever wants to make peace should make peace, and whoever wants to make war should make war. Girgasi Amad Upaname Elav. So one group, the Girgasites, left. Lefichach Nidnalo Eretz Yafab Keretzo. Therefore, they got another nice land, etc., etc. So the Medrash is telling us that the house is afflicted with tzarat, as Anne began to say, in order that we'll have to rip it apart and find these riches which had been hidden. And right, you're probably more familiar with it from Rashi than from the Medrash. Well, I shouldn't make assumptions. Maybe some of us study Medrash more than Rashi, but Rashi quotes this. V'natati negat tzaraat b'sorahi lahem shenagaim ba'im alehem. Right, it's news. It's a good tiding to them that they will get these leprosies. Lefishi isminu emarim mat maoniot shel zahav bekirot batehem kol 40 shana shal Yisrael b'midbar. Because the Amorites hid their gold in the walls of their houses for 40 years that the Jewish people were wandering in the desert. Al yedei hanega notates habayit umotzan, and as a result of having this leprosy, this tzaraat, the person will have to rip apart the walls and will find it. Okay, Anne, what were you going to say about this?
Well, the Rebbe has an interesting take on it, that the people who, I think, who wind up in these houses are people who really are coming along pretty well with their working on doing mitzvahs, but of course they still have some problems. But their goodness in and of itself is something. As soon as the mezuzah goes on the door, sometimes it's enough to take care of the depravity of the tzaras, which
Uh-huh.
is seeped into the walls. But if it isn't, this is a way for them to receive a reward for what they have done. And it brings them to a kind of consciousness of God's really being right there with them all of the time. They have a feeling of oneness with God, which is a tremendous reward as a
Yeah.
result of all of that. I know you're going to get into some of that later on, but I thought it was really rather remarkable. So that it sheds light on the statement. I think myself, I was just thinking in Sanhedrin that there isn't going to be a case like this. In other words, there never was a case where someone's behavior was so negative and therefore they were punished with it. We had tsaras in the houses, but it was there for those who were already on the right path to take another whole leap in their relationship with Hashem. So
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. So right. So this also, remember what we saw earlier from Rabbanit Sharon Rimon, that this is not a punishment, because we generally think of tzaraat as being a punishment. But if it's a punishment, so then it's it's hard that, right, there's a general principle, right, the chot niskar, that generally we don't think that someone who sins should be rewarded for their sinning. But if you're being punished with tzaraat and the result is that you find all this gold, so that seems to be counter to what we would think. Right? We have to dig a little bit deeper. So if it's not a punishment, but it's still trying to teach a person that they have to improve their ways, so it still sounds like not the reward you expect for someone who's being taught a severe lesson. But it makes it perhaps a little bit more palatable. Just I wanted to point out one sort of technical thing before moving on with some of the more spiritual lessons we might derive from this. And that is, where does the Medrash get the idea that this would be a good tiding, right? There has to be, right? Every time we have a Medrash that has these really far out ideas, there's usually something in the text that clues it in. Right? It's playing off of something.
Yep.
So we have the pasuk from Devarim, which tells us that God promised that He's going to bring them to a land full of good. So what does it mean to be full of good? Maybe this is what it means to be full of good. But the Malbim points out that there's another really interesting thing, and that is, if we go all the way back, actually, let's go to the first source. The pasuk which introduces the idea of tzarat in the house says, Ki tavou el eretz Canaan, asher ani noten lachem la'achuza, v'natati nega tzaraat beveit eretz achuzatchem. When you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house in the land you possess. Keep that in mind, and let's read the other instances where the Torah described tzaraat of the skin and of the clothing. In chapter 13, verse 2, Adam ki be'or b'saro se'et o sapachat o baheret vaya be'or b'saro lenega tzaraat v'huva el Aharon hakohen o el achad mibanav hakohanim. If a person has on the skin of the body a swelling, a rash, a discoloration, and it develops into scaly affection of the skin of the body, it shall be reported to Aaron the priest. The next time, Nega tzaraat ki tihiyeh ba'adam. When a person has a scaly affection, it should be reported to the priest, but really the better translation would be v'huva el kohen, he should be brought to the priest. Ubasar ki yihiyeh bo be'oro shechin v'nirpa. When an inflammation appears on the skin of one's body and it heals. V'ish o isha ki be'or b'saram beharot levanot. If a man or woman has the skin of the body streaked with white discolorations. Finally, when we get to the clothing, habeged ki yebo nega tzaraat bebeged semer be'ever b'shtim. When an eruptive affection occurs on the cloth of wool or linen fabric. What's different between the presentation of the tzaraat of the house versus the presentation of the other forms of tzaraat?
Verse 33 is pretty clear about saying the first one, I inflict a plague upon the house.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
Vinatati nega, right? I will afflict, I will place, I will give, however we're going to translate that. As opposed to all the other times where it says, ki yihiyeh, nega tzarat ki tihiyeh, if there will be. Right? It's much more active in the instance of the house than it is with the other instances. Right? The other one seems to be saying it appears out of the blue. It's there. Right? Even the reaction, you should be brought to the priest, is showing that there's some sort of passivity, that there's this is a situation which kind of just emerges out of the blue. And so the Malbim makes that point in I think it's source number 8. Let me just find it in my packet.
10, I think.
Or we yeah, so actually let's first see the Mizrahi. The Mizrahi is what we call a super commentary on Rashi. Right? Rashi is a commentator on the Chumash, and the Mizrahi is a commentator on Rashi. It's very meta. So the Mizrahi says, "V'natati negat tzaraat, b'sorahi lachem shenegaim ba'im alehem." Right? He quotes the Medrash, which says that this is a good news or good tidings. B'vayikra Rabba de imlokein my vinatati negat tzaraat ki tiyemi baile. Says that the Medrash is picking up on this differentiation in language, right? If it were like all the other tzaraat, which are truly punishments, then it should say, if there will be an affliction of tzaraat on the house. But by the Torah is telling us that God will place it, that's an indication that it is it's more of a blessing or something which is more directly interacting with God. And the Malbim also, in source number 10, says, Kishetik taktik timsa she'al advarim hayotzim migzeirat Hashem lo yomar lashon nitina rak imhem litov. So he says that when something comes from God and it is described as God giving it, vinatan, that means that it's something for good. Oshahem l'tachlit kotov, or for some good purpose or good intention. And he gives a number of examples. Aval hadvarim haraim lo yavo lashon nitina. But for something bad, the Torah will never use the term natan. So that's the textual clue on which this medrash might be building. A, the fact that it uses the verb vinatan, and B, the fact that it's directly from God, that God is the one who gives. It's not that this tzarat appears out of the blue. So that seems to be the basis for this tradition that the Medrash and Rashi quote. Okay, Arthur, we're going to get to your favorite guy in a minute, Rabbi Kasher. And Rabbi Kasher's favorite guy is the Kli Yakar, source number 11. And we'll just stick with the English. You must know and understand that these three types of tzaraat afflict three different things, right? We said tzaraat afflicts the body, the clothing, and the house. Because these three things are the three coverings a person has. The first covering is the skin of his flesh. On top of that are his clothes, which cover his skin. And on top of that is his house, which covers him completely and protects him from the wind and the rain and all the other elements. One who has all these coverings removed is considered wild and exposed. Therefore, the plague of the skin is mentioned first, then the plague of the clothes, and finally the plague of the house, in order to remove all of his coverings one by one until he is completely wild and exposed. Right? It assumes that there's a progression from easiest to most severe. That's not necessarily how the Torah describes it, but the Kli Yakar makes that assumption. So Rabbi Kasher says on this, again, like Rabbanit Rimon, they're devastating, but they're not meant as a punishment exactly. They're God's way of slowly, methodically breaking down all the barriers that we have that keep us at a remove from the world. We move about in society, playing out a role, amassing possessions and accomplishments. We wear nice clothes, carefully selected to project an image of style or wealth, modesty, or beauty, as if these were our essential traits. We try to present an impressive, invincible self to the world and hope that we are convincing. But then we run home, lock the door, and only there, behind the cover of walls, are we left alone with our true selves. But even then, we have our masks. You look in the mirror and see a face. Is that really you? Are you just your skin, your flesh, or is there something more to you? Where is the essential self? What are we when everything is stripped away? If we took off all of our coverings, what would we find? It would not be hidden gold, that much is certain, not our money or our success, not our intelligence, our charisma, or our beauty. Forget about where you live, what you wear, what you look like. None of that matters. When you're finally and completely exposed, what is waiting inside at the core of your being? Who are you really? That is the question that haunts us.
Mhm.
So again, not a punishment, but a way of reconnecting. And it still, though, begs the question, why the riches at the end of this process, right? Anyone have, I mean, we could begin to think of some nice messages, nice ways of couching it, but why would you go through such a gut-wrenching process, which is supposed to be difficult and seems to be brought about by some shortcoming in the way that you're conducting yourself, and in the end find all these unexpected riches and treasures?
Mhm. Mhm.
We get used to doing things in a certain way, and we have to kind of be shocked out of it, moved out of it.
Okay, and so let's just build on that. And the change in our routine might be what really enriches us, right? Like we think about Tshuva and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Yeah, we're part of it, of course, is trying to make amends and fixing that which we did that wasn't good. But part of it is digging deeper into ourselves and connecting with who we truly are, with who we really are. And maybe we can see this gold, this right, whether it means real gold or whether it means that by going through such an intense process, a difficult process, right? Tearing apart your home, having nowhere to live, but by going through that and hopefully getting the proper message that this is meant for us to connect with our true inner selves, with our essence, so then we will merit all sorts of symbolic treasures and riches. We'll become better versions of ourselves. We'll become truer versions of ourselves. Maybe that's how we should understand this treasures that will be discovered. Let's just take it, along those lines. I heard a really beautiful explanation. I couldn't find it written up anywhere. I probably just have to buy the book and then it'll be there, but I was hoping to find it somewhere online. I couldn't. Rav Pam, who was the Rosh Hashiva in Torah V'dat, says something very similar to this. He says, right, building on the Rashi, the Medrash, that there are some times when a person is a poor, I think that the way I heard it described, I don't know if this is what Rav Pam wrote, is a poor millionaire. Meaning what? Meaning you're sitting on riches, but you don't know about it, right? You have an oil field in your backyard, but until you dig, you don't know that it's there. And so you live a life of poverty, not knowing that if you were to just stick the shovel in the ground, you would find some treasure that would totally change your lifestyle. So Rav Pam says that the same is true with our spiritual lifestyle. That when it comes to our spiritual religious selves, that we don't know what riches we're capable of. We truly possess if we just dig a little deeper. If we just allow ourselves to go through this process of introspection and reflecting on who we really are, what we're meant to be, we'll never discover our true potential, what we really can be. And so he says very similarly that's what's going on with this medrash. And we'll end with the Sfat Emet. Again, if I need to scroll down anymore, there's all the English bits. Okay. So the Sfat Emet says as follows. ask the question that everyone asks, Kasha ma Metzora hizu, why is this considered a good tiding? Pirush Rashi, Sheitz Minu Kananim, he quotes Rashi that the Canaanites hid their gold in the walls. Vikasha. V'kihayat sarich habori yibarech ela ha'etzut v'lama lo natan laKananim zot hamachshava latmin v'shis tarchu b'nei Yisrael ha'chriv habatim. Right? If God wants to give us the riches of the Canaanites, he could have just given us their riches. Why we have to go through this whole process of them hiding it in the walls, and us living there for many years, and then going through this process of emptying out the house? It doesn't seem to be the most efficient way. Omnam vadai gufa inyan nigei batim hu pela gadol v'hu ot mofet al kedusha b'nei Israel shemevi'in kedusha v'tahara gam v'mekamot moshotehem. Says so. It must be that this whole issue of sarat of a house is something wondrous, and it's a great sign of the sanctity of Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, that they bring holiness and purity even to the places of where they live, right? I think that means not only in the Beis Hamikdash, not only in Shul, not only in the Beis Medrash, but even in our homes, we bring sanctity and purity. Yesh lamod kal v'chomer, dichtiv even mekir tizaku. Okay, Mikol sheken mida tova meruba she'atzadik tzarich lavi hargashat kedusha b'chol hashayach elav gam b'tzomeach v'domim. So he says that the job of a tzaddik, of a righteous person, is to bring a feeling, a sense of holiness to everything that belongs to him, both animate and inanimate, alive and not alive. This is what the Jewish people did, is that they redeemed the land of Israel from the impurity, from the tumah, and they brought it to an elevated state of sanctity. Right? So when God's appearance is manifest in the land of Israel, that's in the Beis Hamikdash. And this is what the Torah means when it says in Kriyat Shema, b'chol me'odecha, with all of your property, with all of your finance. We have to bring a spark of sanctity to all of our material possessions. And that might be the significance of tzara'at in our homes. This is the good tidings, that we're able to elevate every place in the land of Israel. Even that which was hidden. Every physical item, right? This is very classical Kabbalistic Hasidic thought. Every physical item has some spark of holiness in it. Right? And it's a great trial to have to destroy your home in order to bring about the purity, to reveal the purity that is hidden within. And that's right, maybe why when they destroy the home, they find these hidden treasures so that they won't lose out from going through the process of introspection and trying to find all the hidden sparks. So building what we said previously, I just wanted to suggest that maybe the ultimate message and why we have to go through all these steps of going into the land, having the treasures been hidden many years previously, and then, right, the process of destroying our home, is that it may be finding this treasure, and presumably they know the source of where this money came from, where this gold came from, helps to connect back to our origins, right? You're really bummed out. Your home is afflicted with sarat. You have to destroy the house. You have to take it apart. Oh, Baruch Hashem, I found this hidden treasure. I found this gold. I found this money. I found this silver, whatever it is that you find. Where did this come from? This must have been here from before my ancestors got here. This must be really old. And by recognizing the history of how it got there, that might help the Jew to connect back to that earlier time in our own history. When we were traveling in the desert, when we were so close to Hashem, living in God's presence, that it was manifest all over the place. So the history of how this gold, how these treasures got here might help to connect us back to our origin, right? Historically speaking, but also spiritually speaking, when we were existing at that high level, we were able to experience it. And so, yeah, it's a bit ironic that we seemingly are being punished or have to go through this very difficult process to learn an important lesson, that we would be rewarded with such wealth and such riches. But if we spiritualize the message a little bit, I think that we can all then perhaps relate and appreciate all the riches that can be found in our own lives as well, when we're able to tear down some of the barriers that we might have allowed to come up. Any questions or thoughts on any of this?
I wanted to thank you for bringing it this way right after Pesach, because at Pesach we are supposed to find some new way of looking at ourselves, some redemption, that some barrier that has been removed, that we can, now do Hashem's will better. But
Right.
we still know we have a long way to go. And this is such a hopeful time to hear that. And also that we know that in the days to come, there will be a repetition of what has happened with Yetzias Mitzrayim and other things. And I thought the Rebbe's last point was really good. The purpose of the destruction of God's house, the temple, was in order to reveal the, quote, hidden treasures of divine consciousness that will be manifest with the restoration of the temple
Oh, wow.
and the Messianic
Yeah.
redemption.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good twitch.
As long as we're not finding crumbs of bread when we're tearing out the walls, right?
Right.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for bringing that piece in. All right, next week is going to be Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, Tuesday evening at the shul.
Mm.
So we will not be
Wow.
having a Parsha Shir. I hope everyone will please join us. I believe starting
What
time is 7:20 for Mincha, followed by a Yom HaZikaron ceremony, and then a festive Tfilah Hagigit, festive davening for Yom HaAtzmaut. It's one of the true highlights at Netivot Shalom, and I look forward, hopefully, to seeing everyone there. And we'll resume our Parsha studies in 2 weeks.
Very good. Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, have a great night, everybody.
Thank you so
Good,
much
you too.
for all these sources. Whoa.
Wow.
Okay, thank you.